This is the last in a series of 3 special reports on the state of the economy with Treasury Secretary William E. Simon. I'm Gene Valentino, Mutual News, Washington. We'll discuss the prospects of economic recovery in just a moment. The most devastating economic slump since the 30s has loosened its grip on the nation. The recession has bottomed out and the country is poised for recovery. And while there's not yet reason for jubilation, perhaps a gentle sigh of relief may be in order for having passed a milestone at least. But in the words of Treasury Secretary Simon, we have won the battle, but we have not won the war. And despite his guarded caution, his predictions of recovery have been mostly accurate. He confirms what he told this reporter last January.
The economic statistics of the last 3 months have given us definite assurance that the recovery is at hand in our economy. And while we're going to have some disappointing statistics over the next few months, they are going to illustrate what indeed has occurred, what is occurring in our economy.
But despite the accuracy of many of his predictions, they have not been applauded in all circles. Labor leader George Meany, a constant critic of the administration's economic policies, pointed out that millions are still out of work.
No matter when the administration economists pronounce the official end of the business recession, the human recession of unemployment will continue for the rest of this decade unless strong actions are taken now.
I sympathize with Mr. Meany's description of a recession because obviously we have great compassion for those that are unemployed in the economy, and we've taken many steps to alleviate any of their hardships. But we have to understand that unemployment responds slowly, and the unemployment rate will only begin to decline after economic activity is commenced. And this brings us to the most important point, that what are the best policies that will assure a lasting full employment with price stability, a lasting prosperity in the country that is going to benefit all people? Well, the best thing we can do in that regard is to make sure that we warm up the economy, but don't overheat it, and make sure that we allow our system, our free enterprise system that provides 85% of the jobs in this country, to function freely without the heavy hand of government.
This is a special report on the state of the economy with Treasury Secretary William E. Simon, coming to you from Mutual News, Washington. We'll continue with our guest in 1 minute. The road to recovery got another boost during the first week of July. Retail sales jumped 2.2%, putting that week's sales 9% above the level of a year ago. But the road to recovery is not a smooth one. Just as the automobile industry appears to be coming out of its long sales slump, automakers are closing nearly half their plants around the country to prepare for the new 1976 model changeover. Only temporary, but nonetheless, automobile production this week is expected to drop to the lowest point of the year. There are those in government and the private sector who see the recovery now. But Secretary Simon saw the patch of blue in the gray sky over 6 months ago, and he faced a storm of rebuke for having dared to predict recovery at that time.
Well, I think that the real story of the past year, the story that really escaped all of the headlines, has been how well our political and economic systems have performed under conditions of extraordinary strain. Now, time and time again, the unfolding of events has confounded the calamity Janes that we've had in our midst, and it's been a field day for them. These people who seem to take a perverse delight in declaring that disaster lies around every corner. I have profound disagreements with these prophets of gloom and doom because, in my opinion, their philosophy of pessimism can only drain us of our national spirit, lure us toward public policies that don't make any sense at all, and generally make life a little more unpleasant. Fortunately, despite all these preachers of gloom and the headlines attendant, 1974 and 1975 really was not a vintage year for this so-called disaster lobby.
This is a special report on the state of the economy with Treasury Secretary William E. Simon, coming to you from Mutual News. William E. Simon, Secretary of the Treasury, is also chairman of the Economic Policy Board and chief spokesman for the Administration on Economic Issues. At the height of the oil embargo, Simon launched and administered what is now the Federal Energy Administration, chaired the President's Oil Policy Committee, had a major hand in revising the mandatory oil import program in April of 1973. He became Treasury Secretary in May of 1974, putting him on the firing line in the areas of vital concern, energy and economy, during those most difficult times, an oil embargo and a devastating economic slump. And while there's still a long road ahead to recovery, most of his predictions in the past have proven true. Of the many attributes that are America's claim to fame, one surely is its ability to bounce back from adverse conditions and become better from having done so.
Now, let's look. Who would have thought that during the past year and a half, the United States, for the first time in its history, would have both a president and a vice president appointed to office, that we'd experience the highest rate of inflation in our peacetime history, that our economy would fall into its worst slump in more than 30 years, that $100 billion of the world's wealth would be transferred to a small band of developing nations. World events really must have been breathtaking, even for the most hard-boiled. And this, as I say, was a field day for the disaster lobby. Those who preached that we were going to have economic collapse as a result of the oil embargo, collapse of the international financial system as a result of the flow of funds, dollar gas, dollar bread, dollar sugar, dollar toilet paper. When one steps back and takes a balanced view and put forth a more measured judgment, as we attempted to do in government, we were criticized and scorned. And yet, did any of these events come true? No, indeed, they haven't. So I say, let's turn away from those who have obviously lost faith in our country. I really think that it's time to stop tearing down America and start building her up again. This nation is still incredibly strong, powered by the largest and most dynamic free marketplace in the world. Sure, we have weaknesses, but we also have great strengths. In restoring our prosperity, let's begin by building on those strengths once again and bring an end to the ceaseless harping on what's wrong with America. Let's not sell America short.
Trends toward improvement were seen last March by Secretary Simon. He told the National Newspaper Association that many businessmen in a wide range of industries were liquidating excessive stocks. He predicted then that consumer purchasing would continue at a rate sufficiently high to drain off much of the excessive inventory, so that before long, corporations should be increasing production and employment again. What's the feeling now? U.S. News and World Report says the prospect now is a recovery that starts slowly this summer and gains momentum in the final quarter of the year. They cited several factors: rising buying power of consumers, bolstered by tax cuts, slower inflation, expanded employment, the prospects of increases in new orders and production, modest improvements in sales of new houses and cars. Time magazine said shortly after Labor Day, when the usual summer slack period is over, production and sales should be rising fairly rapidly. This is a view of the state of the economy from Mutual News, Washington. I'll be back in a moment. This has been a series of 3 special reports on the state of the economy, featuring the views of Treasury Secretary William E. Simon, discussing the cause of the most devastating economic slump since the 30s and the plight of this nation in its struggle to recover. Your technical director, Bill Wisniewski. I'm Gene Valentino. This is Mutual, your network for news and sport.